Welcome everyone to this special council. Could I ask you please to remain standing? It is with great sadness that I have to announce the deaths, firstly, of the former first chief executive of what is now this borough, but was then Langbarth in 1974, Arthur Midlam. Arthur was town clerk in Redcar for a number of years before moving on through Cleveland County and then coming back as the first chief exec from 1974 to 1982. Also sad to announce someone who will be very well known to all of you, and that's Norman Evans, MBE. Anyone who visited Redcar can't have failed to have seen Norman busking for his charity, and more latterly, I believe, in Morrison's. So can you please all join me in a minute's silence? Thank you. I forgot to mention for Norman that he was, of course, a freeman of this borough. Would you all please remain standing for prayer?
God, our merciful Father, hear our prayers and comfort us. Renew our trust in your Son, Jesus Christ, whom you have raised from the dead. Strengthen our faith that Norman Evans, Arthur Midlam, and all who have died in the love of Christ will come to share in the glory of his eternal resurrection, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, ever one God, world without end. Amen. We pray for this borough of Redcar and Cleveland. Almighty God, the maker and ruler of all things, we humbly beseech you to bless and prosper the people of this borough of Redcar and Cleveland. Strengthen our commerce, sustain our industries, nourish our agriculture, strengthen and sustain our communities, and bless the work of all our charities. Uphold and support our children, and prosper all places of learning, that our borough may truly be a place where all generations can flourish. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
May God grant to the living grace, to the departed rest, to the church, to the Queen, to the Commonwealth, and to all people unity, peace, and concord, and to us and to all God's servants life everlasting. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and upon your counsels this day and always. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Can I first of all welcome Patrick Rice up here. Patrick is standing in for our Chief Executive Amanda, who was unable to join us today, so I hope we don't put Patrick to too much stress. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence. I have on my list apologies from Councillors Kay, Wilson, Furman and Quigley, and Councillors Carol Jeffrey and Graham Jeffrey. Are there any other apologies, please?
Councillors Ovens, Jones and Harding.
Thank you. Item 2. So what was the last one, Josh? Ovens,
Ovens, Jones and Harding.
Harding. Yeah, thank you. Item 2 is to receive declarations of interest. The forms should be going around the council chamber. Item 3 is the medium-term financial strategy for 2019 and 20. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today I stand before you to propose the medium-term financial strategy in 2019-20, also known as the budget of Redcar and Cleveland Council. This year we've had to deal with a variety of pressures, a variety of cuts, but crucially we've also had to deal with that balance that we all have as local authority members between, on the one hand, having the ability for our residents to pay the council tax that they're asked to and our businesses to pay the business rates that they're asked to, with the other side of that, which is ensuring that as councillors we run an effective council and that we look after our adults, our children in care and our street scene and the services that our neighbourhoods expect and deserve. And I believe that the budget that we're presenting today does deliver that. We've all been at this for nearly 4 years now in an administration that has run since 2015, the whole council, all 59 of us. In those 4 years, times have got even tougher as austerity has continued to bite. Austerity has not ended in that period, it has only got worse. So since 2010, this council has cut £83.5 million from its budgets. That has resulted in the council losing 1,400 staff. Thankfully, not many of those by compulsory redundancy, but even so, there are still 1,400 jobs that used to be done for this council, by this council, to its communities that no longer exist. And I think personally that's an absolute tragedy. The government pressures on this council have not ended this year. So the extra pressures over the last year or two have included, we rightly so gave our staff a pay rise for the first time in many years after the public sector pay cap was lifted by the Conservative government. However, we did not expect the Conservative government, after agreeing a financial settlement with them, to turn around and say to us, well, there's no money for that pay rise, find it yourself. We didn't expect that the Conservative government would turn around to us and say about the GDF Sewers business rate appeal, you never received the business rates in the first place, but it's tough luck, that's the system, suck it up. But that's what we heard. We did expect the government to cut £4.1 million from our revenue support grant going into the next year, and we factored that in. But generally speaking, we're in the difficult position where we planned initially for £9 million of cuts in the coming year, and that figure is now nearer £18 million, and it's because of those ever-changing goalposts from that Conservative government. So in light of that, this report today, this budget today, puts to the council a small increase in the council tax of 1.99%, which is the lowest council tax increase in the Tees Valley this year, and as always, Redcar and Cleveland Council is at the lowest end as it has been for the last 4 years. A 2% rise in the adult social care precept to help look after the adults in care in this authority and more widely. The setting of a general reserve position of around 5% of the overall budget, the revenue budget, but a level of just over 5 million is the lowest it's been for some years. We're also, on the optimistic side of the coin, putting forward a capital programme that's £109 million over the next 4 years. This is not money that the council has currently, it's money the council is either going to borrow, either going to take in from asset sales, or is going to get from partner agencies such as the 20 million we've seen that we've requested and delivered from the Tees Valley Combined Authority for the Regent Cinema, and the £10 million for across the borough more generally as part of the Indigenous Growth Programme. I think at this point it would be quite key to say that Redcar and Cleveland is not alone in proposing a council tax increase this year. The Local Government Information Unit, the organisation that represents all councils, have suggested that 97% of councils will put up the council tax this year. Of those 97%, 3/4 of them will put it up over and above the rate that we're suggesting today of just under 2%. That shows that local government is at breaking point and at crisis level due to underfunding from central government over the last 9 years of austerity. No councillor goes into local government to raise council tax. We as councillors are council taxpayers ourselves, but more importantly, we represent the views of our residents. We represent and understand the views of financial times also hitting down at residential level. But why are we raising the council tax this year? We have a legal duty as a council to set a balanced, fair budget, and that's what we're proposing today. And like I said earlier on, we need to balance the ability of this council to fund the services that our residents need, expect and deserve with the ability of our residents to pay. Local government is in crisis, as I've said previously, across the country. The Local Government Association, which is chaired by a Conservative Lord, they suggest that local government will be underfunded by next year by £6 billion. That's the impact of these cuts. That's the reason we're having to make the decisions that we're making today. But one thing about those decisions, I think, to the credit of everyone in this council chamber, for the majority of the last 4 years, we've worked on a cross-party basis. There are 28 of us on this side of the room, and there are 59 councillors. Our scrutiny chairs are from opposition parties. Our planning chair is from an opposition party. Our cross-party working groups tend to be chaired by opposition councillors, or at the very least, include them in a great number. That's the way that we've worked as a council. That's how we've achieved what we've achieved over the last 3.5 years together. Crucially, as a council in 2017, we set out to set a medium-term financial plan that would cover 2017-18, 2018-19, and 2019-20 that we're going into in the coming financial year from April. And I'm pleased to say that 40 councillors supported that in 2017 to showcase this is what we had to do to make sure that Redcar and Cleveland both kept its doors open, but also provided the excellent services that our residents deserve. I think kind of moving forward after this year, the problem does not go away, which is quite sad, I think, for local government. So we have a figure of £34 million still a cut, even after this financial year that we're going into, and the 18 million figure I mentioned earlier for this year. However, I think our residents understand this. Our residents understand how hard things have been for local government and how hard things have been for local police, local fire, local NHS services due to austerity cuts by a Conservative government since 2010. As such, the consultation that we did on this budget received only 174 responses. I'd like to have seen 10 times that figure, if not more. But we ask, and we can only go on the responses we get. Of those 174 responses, 66% understood why the council was putting the council tax up and thought that it was a prudent decision. 69% understood that about the adult social care levy. So an overwhelming majority on both those things. So finally, we're meeting the awful challenges of austerity through a variety of factors. We're going to continue to have to cut services, and services that we think as a council we should be providing, but we no longer can afford to do so. Early help is an example of that, which will be a cut that will come forward this year. So there's about £5 million of cuts. There's a shortfall of £5.2 million in children's services, which will have to be redesigned from elsewhere. So this will be budgets from other directorates, some savings on the minimum revenue provision, which you're asked to approve today, and the purchase of some loans that we had, as well as the use of reserves. And finally, we're using this year £6.6 million of this council's reserves, which is right and proper. We always said we wanted to use all available resources to help mitigate the impact of any of these decisions on our residents, and we are doing that. But even spending £6.6 million of reserves, we still can't meet that gap without the small increase in the council tax this year. So things aren't getting better. Austerity isn't over, but we need to sit here or stand here today and deliver a legal, balanced budget that's both fair to our residents, but also fair to the people out there who expect, deserve our services and access them on a regular basis. We will try our best through our capital programme in the next 4 years to begin to stimulate the economy of Redcar and Cleveland, and we see some of that through our high street investments of £5 million, our industrial estates investments of £2 million, and our £1 million for public realm. But we can't do this alone. We need the support of all councillors. So I ask councillors today to pass the recommendations on page 1 and 2 of their report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Do I have a seconder, please?
Make a few comments now, please. I think I say every time of the year, this time of the year, I say that this is the day in the council that I look forward to the least. It's the day when we have to say to our residents once again, we need you to pay more, but you aren't going to get any extra services for the cash that you're going to pay. In fact, you're likely to get less. And not just a bit less. In this borough, it's going to be £83.5 million less of investment that we should have got. Our budget, I think it's very clear for everyone to see, and as Chris has described, is at breaking point. This is the last budget we're going to set in this administration. And since we started Shaping Our Future 3 in 2017, we've constantly been reviewing and we've constantly been cutting. It's all we've done. And the fact is, the cuts that we've imposed and the impacts that they've had is felt by everybody. It's felt by us as councillors, because none of us got elected to cut things. That isn't why we're here. It's felt by our officers who have to deliver in very difficult circumstances and who also understand the enormity of the changes that are having to be made. But most of all, we know it's about the effect on the people of Redcar and Cleveland, the people that we serve. I'd like to say a couple of thank yous. I want to say a thank you to Amanda and to John and to their teams for the work they've done once again to get us to this point. To all our staff and their trade unions who continue to operate under such difficult circumstances and who understand and recognise the position that we're in. The people that work for us here in this council, and I do induction and see a lot of the new ones coming through, they do a tremendous job, and they've been called on to do more with less for every one of the last 4 years, and now we're asking them to do it again. I also want to thank my cabinet, particularly my deputy leader, Councillor Massey, for the work that he's done on this very effectively, and to every single one of you who've engaged with us through the scrutiny and other processes to try and manage what is an extremely difficult situation for us all, a situation that we find ourselves in for the 4th year on the run. And most of all, I want to thank the residents of our borough who've responded hugely positively, both to the consultation, although be it small, but more importantly, those who give freely of their time to work in their communities, often in place of the services that we have had to withdraw. And I cannot say a big enough thank you to all of those people. So the decision that we are taking today is a difficult one, but we're not alone. As Chris has said, nearly all councils are being forced to increase their council tax and the social care levy, as well as increasing charges for services, although I do have to say that the increase that we're proposing in terms of the council tax is, as it has been for the last 4 years, the lowest in the Tees Valley. We've heard the figures, and as I've said time and time again, those cuts disproportionately fall on authorities like ours here in the north, and that is a fact. We've seen a cut of £660 per household here in this borough. Tory councils in the south of England on average only face cuts of £124 per household. How can that be fair? It isn't. Those cuts are imposed by a government who seem unconcerned, completely unconcerned about the fate of local services. They are unmoved by the children and older people that we can no longer support. And they are completely and absolutely unfazed by the fact that they have driven us to the brink of financial crisis. And that is where we are as local government, and that is where we are as Redcar and Cleveland. They tell us that austerity has ended, yet as I said at the last council meeting, 386 children in our borough had to turn to food banks this Christmas. Is that the end of austerity? I don't think so. I think something is blatantly wrong and blatantly unfair if that is the circumstances our people have to live in. So we've done what we can in this budget once again. I think we've protected council tax benefits, haven't we? Yes, we have protected council tax benefits so that none of our families on the lowest incomes have to pay more. And I'm also absolutely delighted to say that from the 1st of April, our own lowest paid staff will be receiving the real living wage rate of £9 per hour once again. This is significantly higher than the national living wage rate of £8.21, and we've done that for a number of years now, and that's really good news. I'm also really pleased that despite the cuts that we continue to fund jobs and growth in the borough. And Chris has mentioned some of them, but we've delivered projects right across Redcar and Cleveland. Eston, Town Square, Low Grange, Broughton, Kirkleatham, Skelton, Grangetown, Cotham, Saltburn, Skinning Grove, Redcar, Gisborough, Loftus, Easington are just the ones I've got on our list. But every ward in this borough, you will find work that councillors and this council have put investment in and are working to deliver the best possible services that they can.
Can I ask you to
Yes, you certainly can. But as I said, right from the outset of this is a really hard call for this council, and it's a really hard call for everybody in here. But I am, and I remain proud of us all. Proud of our response to things like the steel crisis, other job losses. We've successfully negotiated the devolution deal, bringing in the most recent investment of £30 million. We're doing all sorts of other things to ensure that we provide the best possible services we can in the circumstances that we face. I could go on, I'm not allowed to because of the time, but what we will go on doing is providing excellent services, effective financial management, and in spite of the cuts, we will keep on delivering for the people of Redcar and Cleveland. I hope that once again all of you will support this budget. We have no alternative but to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I remind members who wish to speak that they have 5 minutes. If there are a lot of members wishing to speak on this debate, I will give a 30-second warning. After the 5 minutes, I will pass on, irrespective of whether the member has finished, on to the next member on my list. Okay? Councillor Lanigan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Mossy, for your budget. And I understand where you're coming from with this. And I understand what's happening with central government. And that we haven't actually got the money within this area. I have a problem with this. And I know that Redcar and Cleveland Council try to support our low wage earners. But I've got people just above that threshold that are not getting any help whatsoever with their rates. So I have a dilemma. When I read through the budget papers, I have to tell you that I was absolutely appalled by the police precept. I've been to see the police and spoken to them, to Barry Coppinger, sorry, and I said to him, are we going to get any services? And he said no. Bearing in mind in East Cleveland that we have no police whatsoever, and this is coming up at more than 10.5% increase that's going through, and I know that that's been put to the council and we have no jurisdiction over that. But we do have members on the police authority that can actually look at that rationally. And yes, their budgets have been cut, but sometimes you've got to manage that budget in the best way possible. So what they're saying to us is 10.5% increase, but you're not getting anything back. And I understand what Sue said there, and we are trying to manage the best we can. But it isn't helping those people just above that threshold. And I don't know what we're going to do with that. Loftus in particular has a town council, and to their credit, this time they haven't increased that precept. But the people within my ward are struggling. And I've been contacted by dozens of them over the last few weeks. And I'm sorry that the people who contacted me didn't contact the council to say, look, we're in dire straits as well. I actually looked at our debt increase that we've got. And from 2017, the debt increase that we've borrowed in this council amounts to over £41 million. that we have increased our debt. And I understand why you're doing that and that there's other things to pay for, but we have to remember those residents out there that are absolutely on the borderline. And I don't know the answer to this, but I want to make it absolutely clear that we are struggling where we are without these increases going on top of it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hannigan. Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At yesterday's resource scrutiny, I was criticised when I said I was not prepared to discuss the budget papers before today. I enjoy the opportunity to discuss items in scrutiny, to effect change, and to explore new ideas. Excuse me. But this budget is a done deal. For the last 2 years, under Shaping the Future 1 and 2, ideas were discussed. But this year, we have just been presented with this report on how the Labour Cabinet intend to spend their already decided increase on council tax. A done deal. My problem is that the proposals in the Labour Cabinet's budget are all down to political ethos or ideology. All we hear about is the austerity cuts imposed on their council. What people appear to have forgotten is that it was the succession of Labour governments who nearly bankrupt this country. This Labour Cabinet have followed in their path of their former government colleagues. They have increased council tax every year, but also drained our reserves to the tune of 100 million. A recent report described Redcar and Cleveland Council finances as unstable. Huge amounts have been spent in Redcar on the back of losing the steelworks. But the Labour groups have also threatened to withdraw the mobile library, which is a lifeline in East Cleveland and also serves the care homes. The leader has just announced, possibly in election fever, that they intend to get 20 million from the combined authority to spend on the Regent Theatre and Coat and Bowl. But this has not been submitted, but they have not submitted a business plan. Are they now turning to the combined authority as a piggy bank? Only 5 months after the budget last year, Children's Services announced they were 3.5 million in deficit. I repeatedly asked for a breakdown as to how this arose, but was given no answer. By December, we were told that the deficit was only 1.5 million. Now the full 3.5 million appears in the budget book. I accept they have statutory role, but they also have other services which can be looked into. This is a budget of irresponsible spending and poor monitoring, which, if approved, will leave the new administration in May with an empty kitty. I cannot support this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Councillor Hannaway, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to answer some of those points by Councillor Watts. Councillor Watts says that our budget is based on ideology. And she's right. It is based on ideology. It's based on a Labour ideology that's the basis of us paying the living wage. It's based on a Labour ideology that we've increased our funding to children's services. So as I said to you on a previous occasion, you know, if we had all the children here, which one would you say we'd spent too much money on? It's Labour ideology that makes us very concerned about the safeguarding and welfare of those children. It's Labour ideology that leads us to implementing the ethical care charter that kept all those libraries open and that has saved the Regent Theatre so that residents can go on watching cinema in Redcar. Yes, she's right, that is all Labour ideology. And by and large, it seems that the public, or at least those that have responded to our questions, that they agree. I mean, if you look at the comments in Appendix 12, and I admit this is only perhaps a self-selecting sample of the population, But in general, there are very few of them that are offensive. Some of them are quite direct. Some of them say, you know, we still have to look at waste, or that we should pay our senior staff less money. But I wish they could see them. I wish they could see the senior staff in children's services enduring what amounts to mental torture every day and trying to find the money to meet the increases in demand. I've lost the page at the moment because I closed the book, but my favourite comment in Appendix 12, if I can find it, there it is. I'll finish with this. This is my favourite comment from the consultation. Any increases are hard to take as a taxpayer. Government cannot let ordinary people take all the burden. But ordinary people cannot see key services lost because of government policy, which is against places like the North East. Reluctantly, I agree with the council tax increase. It's a way of saying we are proud of what we do in Redcar and Cleveland, even if the government doesn't give a damn about us.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaway. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thank you indeed, Chair. Again, we say this is based on ideology, and it is. If you like, the founding ideology of Labour in 1945 was care from the cradle to the grave. And in a sense, Craig is the cradle to 18. And in my role, I presume I'm 18 to the grave, or to the creme. On that basis, I just want to make a few comments from my own portfolio. And with apologies, I'm going to have to repeat some of the things I said at scrutiny yesterday. About 30 odd years ago, when I first entered local government, I was shown around the work of a social services department by the then Director of Social Services of Cleveland, Mike Bishop, who told me he had a golden opportunity. He was able at that time, in a period of non-austerity, to be able to reduce some money going into services for the elderly and to put more money into areas which up to then he felt to be neglected, like learning disability, physical disability, deafness, the blind, etc. And the reason for that ability to do that was, as he put it, we are dealing in 1985 with the shadow of the Great War, those people who went out to the trenches and never came back, the husbands who never had sons or daughters, the mothers who never had children, and that shadow was moving through the 80s. Of course, now we're moving through another shadow. It's a very different shadow. It's a shadow of the boom generation of 1945 to the mid-50s, and you know, I'm an early member of that particular generation myself. And we all know the inexorable rise in the number of elderly in our borough. It's in your reports. It's in the public health report that came out with the cabinet papers for next week. We also know the generational issues of increasing aging, the higher numbers of people moving into an age where, and sadly, dementia becomes part of the daily experience of life. We all know the problems caused in areas like East Cleveland, where the extended families that used to exist at one time are being riven apart as people have been forced to move out of the area for work, meaning the family support networks are not as strong as they used to be. And that means that we've actually got to redouble our efforts in adult care. We've got to look to more investment for the elderly. We've got to look to more investment for the future. And again, we're having to do that in the atmosphere of austerity forced on us by government. We've been told that we have a levy we can pass on to the local population. But that is actually money that should not be coming from the hard-pressed pockets of people in Eston or Easington or Skelton or Gisborough. It should actually come from Whitehall, but it isn't. We're told also, in fact, I think when this administration took over, we were told that the incoming May government was going to have a root and branch reform of social care, and that a glorious new dawn was going to emerge. And it was all going to be in a autumn green paper in 2017. They then said that autumn green paper was going to be delayed, and it had to be, in fact, a winter green paper for that year. Delay occurred again. It became a spring paper for 2018. More delay, then a summer paper for 2018, and then an autumn paper for last year. And as I understand it, we are still waiting for an autumn paper from last year. The reality is, of course, is that one of the most important social issues in this country has been kicked down the ground like a tin can. Many hundreds of the best civil servants in the country have been working on the detailed demographics needed to underpin that green paper. But what's happened to them? They've all been taken off the job. And you wonder, where have they gone? Well, they've gone to other work. And that other work is, where's the milk going to come
30
from?
seconds left, Councillor Walsh.
Where's the milk going to come from in three or 4 weeks' time? Where are the medicines going to come from in a few months' time? How are we going to get the lorries across the channel? They are working on Brexit. And if we actually look at that and contrast the issues of Brexit against the issues of social care, there's no need to explain what is far more important and what is far more paramount, but this government's overlooked it and will continue to overlook it as long as it carries on its path.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, here we are, happy as it can be. Oh no, all these happy faces looking around, look at it. I've been thinking about this, obviously, like the rest of you, for a long time. And, you know, to me, it's a foregone decision. I've no idea what you mean about ideology, I'm sorry, but I've got a new word, and I use the word capitulate. And I think I've got it right by saying I think we have to capitulate to central government demands. We know we're being starved by them, and it's a deliberate ploy. There's no other way of getting around it. And, I mean, who do you believe? I mean, Theresa May says austerity is at an end. Well, no, it isn't. But then when Sue talks, you know, and Chris, you know, to me, I'm sorry, it's just common sense what they're saying. It's something you've got to have to do. I don't want to do it, but I know what I'm going to have to vote. I ain't very happy about it. But, you know, it's just the way we are, and I don't want this to become a matter of foregone conclusion every single year. I might not be here next time, I might not stand, I don't know, but it seems to be a foregone thing that we will make this decision for the last 3 years to increase the council tax because we have no choice through what central government isn't giving us. And that's not right. I'll go on to one of my favourite subjects though, the Cleveland Police and the Police and Crime Commissioner. It's no secret that myself and Councillor Higgins had a motion of no confidence of him a while ago. And that's been echoed in the local media, online petitions to get rid of him. And I really hope he's not going to be your candidate next year. I mean, he wants to be reminded that a chief constable is not just for Christmas, for example. You know, a chief constable is there to see out a contract. And he just can't deliver what he should be trying to deliver. He's increased, I think, for the last 2 years now, by over 10%. Our precept that we all have to pay. And so quite rightly said, not just about the police, but about all services, we're going to have to pay more for less. And I don't apportion any blame anywhere in this chamber. That blame is directly with central government and nowhere else. We all know this, and we need to get that message out to central government and say, look, enough is enough. I really get, despondent with these people, and I think it takes some drastic action, and I wonder if next year the leader is Sue Jeffrey, would she be prepared to go to Downing Street and handcuff her hands to the railings outside and say, look, enough is enough, come on, we want more money. But, you know, I try to make it light-hearted. It isn't light-hearted. It is so difficult what we have to vote through today. But I see no option, and I feel really, really bad about it. And when I go back to Gisborough, I'm sure people are going to have a go at me, but if they want services delivered to the best of our ability, then I'm afraid to me there's only one option. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Higgins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to reiterate what my colleague, Councillor Clark, has said, because we've discussed this in depth, you know, so I won't go over the same ground. And, you know, it would be a very populistic view, wouldn't it, just to vote against it, especially with the elections coming up. and it's a very, very difficult decision for all of us. I mean, I've thought about it this long and hard and read the papers this last week, and nobody likes to see anything go up, and it's very difficult times. The sad thing is, the country's broken, isn't it? The people feel they're broken. They feel they've lost all respect for central government down in Whitehall, that they haven't got a clue. And I think that was borne out in the Brexit vote, because it was predominantly in the Labour areas and what I call our areas around the country, where the people spoke out and said enough's enough and we want our say. And that's what happens in this country, doesn't it? We plod along, and then all of a sudden the people do it. It's like standing in a bus queue. We all stand there very politely, then all of a sudden there'll be a stampede, and then people want to have the say. As regards the, and I think democracy's broken as well, and I think the people out on the street think that democracy's broken, that they have no confidence in our people in Whitehall, in the MPs and that, and actually they've shown this country up. We've become actually a laughing stock, and at my age I feel quite ashamed at that. You know, I was very proud of my country, and I feel very, very downhearted and very despondent. But today we've got to make this decision, and we've got to make a sensible decision. It's a hard decision, and I know we might all go out there and residents might have a go at us, but a lot of common sense has been spoken. It would be very populistic to vote against it. As far as the police goes, and the police commissioner, I know a lot of people out there have no confidence in the police. We've seen our rates, haven't we? Our rates included our water rates and everything years ago, and now we've got a separate rate there. Are we going to get a separate bill for the police? There's got to be a stop to this. Somebody down in the government in London has got to stop it. There's got to be a big rethink, and we've got to get back on track. And so I'd like everybody today just to think quite sensibly about this vote today, about what we do, and we don't want to do it. We've got to think what's right for this borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. Councillor Glyn Nightingale, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will not be voting for Labour's budget this afternoon. The budget embodies the financial priorities and objectives, and their objectives and priorities don't completely match what I would want to see, and I suspect what Liberal Democrats want to see. But I will be forced into voting to preserve local services. This is my reaction to several willful, detrimental developments facing this council from the Tory government. First, the continued cuts that this council has to face puts pressure on local services. Secondly, the continuation of the government's age of austerity, prolonging this quite unnecessarily, and government created problems for this particular council. Councillor Massey mentioned the case of the GDF sewers, and that's the example I would give. And also the failure of this government to fund social care and passing the buck to the local council. I will vote to provide the council with the resources to compensate partially for the £83 million that have been lost in grants in recent years. I'll vote to prepare the council for the future loss of grants of around 30 million in the next few years. But the reason I'm not in favour of the Labour budget is that we need to shift council resources to frontline services that people need, such as better roads, better footpaths, social care, and frontline staff to carry out that job. Secondly, we need to improve the physical environment, attract people to invest in this area and to live here. We need to implement a green agenda. We need to be a carbon neutral borough by 2030. We need to widen the scope of recycling. So to do that, we need to shift resources from low priority schemes and projects. The most conspicuous of this, it doesn't cost very much, but the most conspicuous of these daft schemes is IIP, and the mindlessly dishing out of pens and toys with the council's name on them. Minor amounts of money, but symbolic. We need to streamline management. We need less chiefs and more Indians. We need to cut out waste and bureaucracy, especially in the quantity and quality of report writing. Here's the Liberal Democrat commitment then. We will tackle the fundamental shift in resources to make this borough a better place for people to live, to make the most of their opportunities and to prosper. Secondly, we will do what is ethically right and protect adult social care. And we will only put up council tax when there's no alternative to protect vital services, like now.
Councillor Nightingale, Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Big ambitions from Councillor Nightingale there. I understand from the polls that the so-called independent group in Parliament is polling higher than the Liberal contingent in Parliament.
This is about this council, not Parliament.
Couldn't resist. And of course, Councillor Nightingale is the chair of the Resources Scrutiny Committee, which voted yesterday, I believe, to endorse the recommendations contained in this report. I don't know whether members of the council have got their cabinet book with them still, but in there is the Flourishing Future report. And of course the future is not that flourishing for many of our fellow citizens in Redcar and Cleveland. And if you happen to have page 45 to hand, which talks about the health of the borough in terms of comparison to other authorities in the northeast, you'll see out of 19 measures, we come in the bottom half of 13 of those, and 7 of those are directly related to children, education being part of that in the secondaries, and I'll come to that in a moment, because I want to talk about the backdrop to what this council is operating against, because austerity, as Councillor Massey has said, is alive and well and flourishing itself. I mean, take policing. Irrespective of the governance arrangement around police, crime in this borough has risen by some 14% over the last year, and it's been driven in the main by violent crime and acquisitive crime, which is a fancy word really for people stealing from shops, because that's what drives a lot of it. And if we follow the experience of Hartlepool after the introduction of universal credit a year ago, we can see that continue to accelerate and food bank usage taken up further. A couple of weeks ago we had a presentation from the CCG in the form of Craig Blair, and in fact he was at the adult scrutiny this week as well. But he gave a presentation prior to full council, which was dismally attended incidentally. But Craig was making the point the allocation to CCGs was subject to the formula in much the same way that we have a formula that redistributes resources from the northeast down to the southeast. And he was complaining quite bitterly, interestingly for a professional, that that was wrong and it wasn't fair, and what it meant the health services in this area had to do, rather than prevent, they had to react to what was happening on the ground. And again, that was a message that was repeated in scrutiny this week. And there was a long debate about the closure of a particular facility in East Cleveland, which I'm happy to say that the scrutiny committee in its wisdom opposed, but they're carrying out reviews as we speak, and more things will be coming forward from health, subject to reviews, and we all know what reviews mean, don't we? Less people and cuts in services. And education. Education, we have no control. The privatisation of education is being rolled out as we speak. We've a task unfinished looking at the poor performance of our secondaries. If we don't get the secondaries right, our kids aren't going to get the education to go on to further and higher education and get skilled up for all these fantastic jobs that are going to come to the ex-steel site, notwithstanding what the combined authority might have to say about these things. We have no control, no influence over the academies. Only this last week there was a select committee in the House of Commons made the point the governance arrangements are shot. There's no accountability to these organisations. They're spending our money paying high salaries, and they're not teaching the children to become the rounded citizens that we would hope them to be. The academisation experiment has failed, and of course when it fails and goes bottom up, who's going to be around to pick up the pieces? Nobody but us, the local authorities. The number of kids with special educational needs is escalating. Our special schools are full, the Prove's full, and the response is to build a super
30
special
seconds,
school,
Councillor
which has to
Jeffrey.
be an academy. Again, outside our control. I'm looking forward to May the 2nd. The response on the doorstep for my party, I think, is good. I hope we're going to come back with an increased majority. I hope that will be a springboard to a general election led by the leader of my party, notwithstanding what anybody else wants to say. He's the person that will bring fairness to politics, not ideology, Councillor Watts, fairness to politics. And if and when we get into power, we will then have a government that will address the issues that Councillor Higgins was talking about. People feel marginalised, people feel as if they've been let down.
Thank you,
because
Councillor
they haven't had
Jeffrey.
a voice, and they're not getting a share of the very large cake that this country has, the 5th richest economy in the world.
Right,
So
Councillor
I look
Turner,
for-
please. Councillor Jeffrey, sorry, time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. I wasn't going to speak on this. To be fair, there's so much in it to commend, Councillor Massey. There is, and Mr. Sampson's team have done an excellent job in putting together the budget they've been asked to put together. But I think all I've heard is Councillor Nightingale had some excellent ideas in his party political broadcast. Right? The ideology, I've got to admit, Councillor Watts, I sort of agree with you, but that's what we get all the time in this chamber. That is where we're at. But you're talking about it being political. My independent colleague said it's populist to vote against this budget. Well, I'm sorry, I voted against raising council tax for 4 years, right? Not because it's this year, not because it's a budget, and yet all I've heard in here is members of the Labour Party pitching what they want to do, so Councillor Jeffrey can stand on the doorstep and listen in his little echo chamber. That's fair enough. Councillor Nightingale made an excellent pitch for his voters out there. I'm not going to pitch to voters. I'm going to vote against this because raising council tax for this borough again, 4 years on the bounce, is wrong. Right? We need to look. You will get the budget you ask for. If you start with not wanting to raise council tax, that's what Mr. Sampson's team would have put together for you. He'd have come back and he said, that's your choice. If you don't want to raise council tax, that's what you've got to do. But you don't. You start from the assumption that you're going to raise council tax. I'm going to oppose this, and it'll go through, but I'm not opposing it because it's populist. I'm not opposing this because I'm pitching for votes. I'm opposing this because it's wrong. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. There are no more members indicating their... Oh, Councillor Thompson. Can I please ask that you indicate your... Please. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't sure if I was going to speak this afternoon, but having listened to some of the comments made, I think it's really important, perhaps, Mr. Mayor, that we focus on our responsibilities today. Now, we have been advised by Councillor Massey that we run an effective council, and that we are now presenting a balanced and fair budget. That we realise that the need to raise funds is primarily a fault of failure in central government support, and that it's actually only a small increase. Well, it may be a small increase for this council, and if it is such a small increase, then I would hazard a guess and suggest that we could look again at how we could better arrange our finances. Now, we are pursuing currently, are we not, 4,700 residents for non-payment of council tax. 4,700. Why are they not paying? So, if it's such a small increase, why do we need it? We've been out to consultation. What we were not advised in the results of the consultation was that 34% of those who replied said that they didn't approve of a council tax increase. Should we be listening to our residents? Now, I have previously opposed these measures because I don't agree with the constitution that says every part of this should be voted on at once. So we have the social care precept that we must vote together with the council tax increase precept. So we are bound to commit. But I don't agree with that principle. Therefore, I have previously said that I will not be supporting, and I've said that at some length in scrutiny. Now, why am I not supporting? Not just because of the points that I've made. And I do agree that we have been unfairly treated by central government. I have said that on numerous occasions, and I have sought and will continue to seek more support, fair support for this borough. But in the meantime, we must do our very best to run this authority efficiently so that we can say to the residents, we have done our very best to make sure that we look after your money. Now, if I think about Saltburn, we haven't, as an authority, done our very best, I'm afraid. These may seem small points, but to the resident, they are indicative of our failure to manage. First question, who is the manager on the foreshore at Saltburn? Well, there isn't one. Why not? What happens when we don't have management? We have a cave appearing under the car park at Saltburn Pier car park, which would have cost 2 bags of concrete to mend if we'd been on the job. Instead, we waited 3 months. It cost £30,000 to repair. The car park ticket machine broke down. Did we look
30 seconds, please, Councillor
Did we look
Thompson.
at alternative ways of collecting money? No, we didn't. So for 5 months, we lost revenue. We awarded a contract for tie bars on the pier, and 1.5 years after awarding it, we were still bringing people back to repair it. That's not right. In 2013, we were promised work to be done on the car park at Catnab. It hasn't been done. We have...
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. It is time. Can I ask Councillor Eyre, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apart from Councillor Nightingale's putting forward some suggestions, but having said that, he failed to say how and where's the money going to come from in order to pay for it. But, Mr. Mayor, as sure as night follows days, eggs are eggs. Every year, we get criticised for a Labour proposed budget. Yet, year upon year, we, from the members from the opposite side of the chamber, we get no alternative proposals on how to do it. So, if you criticise, you don't like it, in my long history of debate and committees, you've got to be in a position to put alternatives, a credible alternative. We've never heard it in the main from across the chamber. So, it's merely words and just plain to the gallery. In years gone by, and coming from some of the members across the chamber who have criticised the Labour budget proposals, they said it's not their job to put alternative proposals. But I say this to them. Members across the chamber hold the chair and the vice chairs of all the scrutiny committees. And in my opinion, it is their job. If they don't like what they see, they don't like what they hear, to put alternatives forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Norton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I was on my feet last week with my BAFTA award-winning movie, my opening comment was, I love this borough, and I shall say it again, I love this borough, and that's why I'm supporting this budget. It's a budget that sets out to protect, to the best of our ability, the frontline services. It's a budget that gives investment that will see some of the schemes that we heard about in economic growth scrutiny this morning to flourish right across the borough. It's a budget for investment as well. I'm also going to support this budget because I fear the consequences if we don't take active steps as a borough council to manage the authority. I read yesterday an interesting fact. A county authority that is facing today a 4.99% increase in their tax, council tax. That authority, by order of the government, is going to be disbanded. Northamptonshire County Council will cease to exist as a Conservative county. It will be turned into two unitary authorities, and their punishment is that the £44 million costs that this will take will be borne by their taxpayers. The government have allowed them to use capital receipts to pay off their debt. Their 2019 elections have been suspended because the cost of running the election is too high. So much for democracy and the Conservative government.
Thank you, Councillor Norton. I have no more members indicating they wish to speak. Councillor Massey, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, members who contributed in the debate, and for those who I've certainly spoken to privately as well. I think that we are in this catch-22 position, and many of the speakers today have articulated that, I think, very well. But to try and answer some of the points that were made. Councillor Lanigan mentioned, obviously, about the low-wage earners and how she feared the impact on that, and I fully agree with her. And this speaks to a system, council tax, that's just quite simply regressive. It's not the way that we should be funding local government, but it's the only way we can. There needs to be a national change in the way local government is funded, because she's right. As much as we have protected those on council tax support, so we increased the amount of council tax support we gave out 3 years ago, we've ensured that those people haven't felt a rise for the last 3 years. But Mary's right that the people who are just above that line are the ones who this really affects, and I think we should all be aware of that, and I think that we are, but it was a good point that she made. Councillor Lanigan and Councillor Higgins also mentioned Cleveland Police and the rise that was obviously included in our budget, but of which we have no control over, of their precept. But I think Cleveland Police's story is the same as our story, which is we're trying to do the same as we used to do with less money. And we're fighting to stand still, both the council and the police, despite our residents treasuring the services that we provide and vitally needing the services that both us and the police need to put those services across. Councillor Watts mentioned that there's been no opportunity to discuss this. I have no idea where she's been in the last 3 years. This is a 3-year plan that started in February 2017. This is the 3rd year of that 3-year plan. There might not have been as much information this year, I do take that point, but the reason there's not as much information is because we had that information for the last 2 years. We've always been on this path, and there's never been anything suggested at meetings I've been at to deviate from that path, particularly at this point. Councillor Nightingale, I thought, spoke very eloquently, and I think quite rightly, we can have different priorities, but still agree on the fact that we need a suitable budget to do it, and I think that's something that politics is for, but we understand fundamentally that the budget is needed to put in place services for the people of Redcar and Cleveland. I mean, I would argue that we have shifted some council resources to those frontline services in the physical environment, particularly through this Labour administration, with the help of our opposition colleagues, keeping open 13 libraries, 5 leisure centres, making sure that our green waste does not have a charge in it, making sure that our collections haven't changed in the last 4 years for our refuse service. I think that's protecting the front line. Councillor Turner said he's vote.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm very grateful for him for giving way. But a lot of the points that Councillor Thompson was making were behind some of the points that I'm making. It is essential that we have these frontline services, but it's also essential that we look at the management of this. And it could well be that there's far too many managers and not enough frontline staff doing the job. And the other point that I wanted to stress was that we need to have the resources in order to do all these changes that I was talking about.
I think in a general sense in our neighbourhoods, we'll all be aware of this, particularly the members in this chamber who were here beyond or previous to 2015, that we used to have a local manager in every single ward across this borough. We now have 3. We used to have 22. We have 3. But yet I think that the on-the-ground frontline service hasn't changed too much. I know those 3 people are swamped, but the general perception is that the grass gets cut at the same frequency it used to. The bins get collected at the same frequency they used to. And I think that's a real success story of the last 3.5, 4 years. Final 2 comments that I think I have. Councillor Turner mentioned that he's voting against the budget because it increases council tax. I admire the stand, I do, but equally at the same time, I think that the Vice Chair of our Council Scrutiny Resources Committee should have said something at that committee yesterday, should have presented an alternative to this potentially, and showed that where would we find the money if we didn't put the council tax up. Councillor Thompson then went on to say that it's a small increase and we could find it elsewhere. It is a small increase in the sense that we know we're asking our residents to pay more, and it's 38 pence for a Band A property a week, and it's 58 pence for a Band D property a week. But for some people, as Mary said, that is a lot of money. We recognise that. But if you accumulate that across the council, it adds up to 1.1, 1.2 million, which isn't a small amount of money. It's a large amount of money. If you extrapolate that for the next 10 years, if we cut council tax this year by 1%, the cost for this council will be 6.7 million over the next 10 years. So we're not talking small amounts. So making a decision on today doesn't necessarily give you the money that you're going to need tomorrow, in 5 years, in 10 years. And as Councillor Norton says, we have a responsibility to set that budget and to set for our future and our children's future, our family's future, a stable, sustainable budget for Redcar and Cleveland. And I'll take it back to 2 of my independent colleagues who I thought spoke very eloquently, Councillor Higgins and Councillor Clark. I think when residents come to look at this, when they read it in the newspaper tomorrow, I think rightly some of them are going to be annoyed because they feel like they've had to pay too much. But I think that, without trying to be too political about this, the majority of people who've stood up here today, whether they're independent from the Labour benches or from the Liberal Democrats, have said that a Conservative government is cutting Redcar and Cleveland Council. So I think if your residents do ask questions about this, that needs to be the message that we're conveying. This is not a council of any stripe doing this. This is a Conservative government doing it to a Labour council, as it happens to be at this time. So I urge members to support the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Voting on this is by recorded vote. I'm going to ask Mr. Rice if he will ask each member independently which way they wish to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will now read out each councillor's name one at a time in alphabetical order, and can you please state whether you are for or against the recommendations within the report? Councillor Eyre. Councillor Baldwin. Councillor Bendelow. Councillor Brown. Councillor Corley. Councillor Clark. Councillor Cooney. Councillor Davies. Councillor Dennis. Councillor Dick. Councillor Dowson. Councillor Furman is absent. Councillor Foggo. Councillor Foley McCormack. Councillor Forster. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Hannaway. Councillor Harding is absent. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Hollyoak. Councillor Hunt. Councillor Dr. Caroline Jackson. Councillor Eric Jackson. Councillor Carol Jeffrey and Councillor Graham Jeffrey are both absent. Councillor Ian Jeffrey. Councillor Sue Jeffrey. Councillor Jones is absent and Councillor Kay is absent. Councillor King. Councillor Lanigan. Councillor Mason. Councillor Massey. Councillor McCluskey. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Glyn Nightingale. Councillor Irene Nightingale. Councillor Norton. Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Ovens is absent. Councillor Pallister. Councillor Quatermain. Councillor Quigley is absent. Councillor Reid. Councillor Ryder. Councillor Smith. Councillor Stainthorpe. Councillor Teasdale. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Thrower. Councillor Turner. Councillor Walsh. Sorry, that's Councillor Walsh. Sorry. Councillor Watts. Against. Councillor Wells. Councillor Williams. Councillor Wilson is absent. Councillor Wright.
That is carried 37 for, 13 against, and 9 members were absent. Item 4 is approval of the pay policy for 2019-20. Councillor Massey.
Yeah, I think this one probably won't take us long. Like we report our pay policy to council every year. It's a requirement of the Localism Act 2011 that we do this. And this essentially tries to set out 3 things. So in the actual statement behind the report, it showcases the remuneration of our senior staff, how much our chief officers get paid, the remuneration of our lowest paid staff, and the relationship between those 2 groups. But I think that the stories that we can pull out from the pay policy beyond the techie language around it are some of the great things that we've done again cross-party at this council through general purposes committees, but through the council in general. And they are that the living wage is paid to authority members on this council of nearly £9 an hour, which I think is an excellent message this council sends, that it pays its employees a fair, decent wage that allows them not just to keep the lights on, but to have a good quality of life as well. The relationship between the 2 groups, the highest paid and the lowest paid, is also shown through what's called the pay multiple, which is averaged out by both a mean and median method. And on both of those calculations, you can see that the ratio, how much our top staff get paid to how much our bottom staff get paid, has narrowed over the last decade. And this is because of the work that we've done for the bottom level of our staff, for the bottom salaried of our staff, to increase their salaries a lot quicker than we have increased any executive salaries, which I think is a really excellent story. One thing to keep in mind, I think, for future years is that we also have to report if there's any gender pay gap. This often is used to suggest or showcase, if it exists in an authority, if women are getting paid unequally compared to men. That has never been the case at this authority for a number of years now. But we have to report that the mean and median pay of females at this authority is higher than male, which I think is a great thing because it actually showcases that we have an excellent chief executive, excellent female directors and male directors. But it showcases that we have in place a great team that's diverse, and I think that's exactly what kind of equal pay and equal rights was meant to achieve, and I think in Redcar that we have, and it's a really good story at this point. But it's key to say that this does not mean that people doing the same job are paid differently. They're not discriminated against whatsoever. It's because we have so many females in high office, which I think is a good thing. So I move that the pay policy statement is approved and published.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please?
And
Thank you.
may speak later.
Okay. Councillor Lanigan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Massey, for this. Yes, of course, I will be supporting this, but what I wanted to ask you was the ratio that has narrowed between our lower grades in there, and when I had a look at that, a supervisory role for our lower grades, and comparing that with someone who was on the top grade in years was extremely small. And I know that you have to have some sort of differential, but what we've got at the moment is we've got a closing gap between them, between a supervisor and somebody who's been here for a considerable amount of time, which goes down to actually pennies in some, it's not quite pennies, but it's not far off that, for the supervisors to take responsibility. Can you just give me some assurance that that differential will remain? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lanigan. Councillor Walsh, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll make again the same comments I made at scrutiny yesterday. And that's just to remind all members that, of course, whilst I think we're doing an excellent job in terms of low pay, combating it, and in terms of gender balance, again, a good job. A number of our services are not delivered by our own employees, but by commissioned employees, and that is primarily, obviously, in social care. And this is an area where, I've got to say action has to be taken, both by central government and by other agencies. The lurking scandal of low pay in social care is one that's even been addressed by the National Audit Office, who see that low pay and low esteem and low motivation as leading to possibly lower standards of care. So primarily, whilst this is a job for government to deal with, and it's got to be dealt with, at least we are trying to do our part. At the beginning of the year, at the beginning of this administration, we renegotiated the contracts for domiciliary care workers, and in that renegotiation made certain improvements as part of that commission, as part of that renegotiation, to make sure, for instance, that people calling between houses and on their journey between houses and journey between calls were paid, and that better wages overall were spread across the sector, and that was built in. And I'd hope that in the future, when we come to the next round of negotiations in both the domiciliary care sector and the residential care sector, we can pick up the pay issues. They're not ones that are posed by the managers in those sectors. They're aware as much as we are, but because of the austerity squeeze, they find themselves at the bottom of the heap. The second area, of course, is to build up comparative esteem amongst care workers. And one of the jobs we're doing here, again, is the Care Academy, which we're running in collaboration with the DWP, Redcar and Cleveland College, where the course is being delivered, and with some of the care companies. And again, this is producing higher motivated, higher qualified care workers. And those higher motivated and higher qualified care workers can attract higher premiums. Again, a win for everybody. The other area, and it's a broader area, which is perhaps more for the leader to speak on, is in terms of our contracting for services and goods. And again, we've got to be looking, and we are looking, at modelling our contractors and procuring policies to try and ensure that we get better social justice within the firms who are supplying us. It's a very difficult area. It's an area fraught with legal problems, but I believe with will on all sides and with the help of our trade unions, it's a battle we can win. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Walsh. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking at the top of page 103, and it advises us that the use of bonuses does not form part of current remuneration arrangements, as if that might improve performance. Now, I'd like just to touch on performance of employees. Remuneration is one part of how we reward justifiably people for attending and performing the duties that we ask of them. However, the last statistic that I saw in terms of annual reviews was that only 67% of employees had had an annual review. This is one of the key ways in which we manage our establishment, and we're not doing it. So if we are going to talk about better managers and better management, one of the tools that should be being used should be being used, because it's an opportunity for engagement between a manager and the officers that the manager purports to manage. And that should be a two-way process to seek, are there any issues? Are there any problems? How can we better collectively perform? So without doing what I think is a key factor in terms of management, we are falling down. Therefore, I would ask us to do better, because we have the potential within our workforce to really perform. We see that in key areas, but in other areas, I think we recognize there is room for improvement, and this may be one way of assisting that. I did say when I stood earlier that sometimes there is no management. So in these situations, it's very difficult for me as an officer to know whom I'm actually reporting to, what I'm responsible for. So we collectively have a task here to do better. So I would ask, in supporting this report, that we do look at how we manage ourselves and manage our very, very good staff.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. No more members indicating they wish to speak. Councillor Massey, can I ask you to sum up, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. On Councillor Lanigan's point, the issues that you kind of outlined there have been discussed at local government across the country because of the difficulties. For instance, I think we have, or we will have at the moment, about 50 spinal point columns, and we've actually got rid of the first 5 of those over the last number of years. From April, there'll be a new spinal column for the council. I think this has been through, or it's going through General Purposes Committee. So that will make spinal column 6 realigned to number 1 again. So we'll start from scratch, and there'll be a 2% differential between every column to try and hopefully mitigate some of the things that you've talked about. So that is in train. Slightly outside of this report, but I understand exactly why you asked it, because it's relevant. On Councillor Thompson's point, I think it's a good point and well made. Our IIP assessment that we recently had done, Councillor Nightingale's favourite exercise, That outlined the fact that we were performing well across a number of areas, and it did outline that we were performing well in what it regards as rewarding our staff, but the point that you made is exactly right, which is that reward is more than just pay. It is about pay, value, appraisal, etc., annual review. And so I think that's something that we certainly want to take forward into next year as we strive for Investors in People Platinum after our success with Investors in People Gold. I move the report.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Voting on this item is by a simple majority of a show of hands, unless any member is so minded to call for a ballot. Can we take it everyone is happy with a show of hands? All in favour, please. Thank you, that is carried. Item 5 is the Members' Allowance Scheme for 2019-20. Councillor Massey again, please.
Yeah, hopefully the penultimate time today. This is always a difficult thing for councillors as well. I've studied for the last couple of years instead, as some of the members opposite have said for that amount of time, if not longer, that we shouldn't be setting our own pay as councillors. This is why we appoint an independent panel to do so. And the independent panel goes away, talks to councillors, talks to staff, and comes up with recommendations. And I don't think that we should stand here and seek to alter those recommendations. If the independent panel says allowances change, they change. If they say they go up, they go up. If they say they go down, they go down. So what they've suggested for this year is that there's no increase in the basic allowance given to all councillors. They have suggested a small change to the number of days that the leader is remunerated for his or her work. Currently, the leader gets 120 days to do the leadership activity alongside the days that he or she would get to do their ward activity. Anyone who knows this leader or even previous leaders knows that that figure is too low. It's way too low. So the independent panel have suggested that the number of days increase from 120 to 125. One of the more major changes the panel have suggested for this year is the removal of the principal opposition leader's allowance and secondary opposition leader's allowance, and their replacement with an allowance that's the same for all group leaders that sit below the council leader, so the leader of other groups other than the council leaders group at that particular time. And that level is set just under £5,000. It also references something that we've had in train for a number of months, if not years, that members should provide their driving details and the details that they have business insurance if undertaking council business in their own car to Democratic Services. That's never been in the policy before, but it's suggested that it should go through there now, and I don't think that any of us would have a problem with that. It also endorses the fact that a carer's allowance can be paid up to the maximum of 50 hours a month. And finally, references that for next year, a piece of work will be undertaken by the Corporate Director of Resources, Mr. Sampson, to look at the development of family-friendly or parental leave policies for elected members if any of us come back after May, so that that can be in place for people who do start a family while they're in office or people who need leave for other reasons while they're in office. So I move the report's recommendations on page 107, 108.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Do we have a seconder, please?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaway. Councillor Mason, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councillor Massey said, and as I say every year, Liberal Democrats do not believe that we should be voting on our own pay and will consequently be abstaining on this.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Glyn Nightingale, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to welcome Councillor Massey and the Labour Group to the same sort of principles that the Liberal Democrats have said for quite a number of years now, that we don't think we should set our own pay. I just want to make a comment as well about this group leaders change. We're thinking of setting up the Ormsby group, and then we'll share out the thing, and then the possibility will be that we'll have the Liberal group and then the Democrat group in the council, and you could have the Momentum group and the Labour group, couldn't you, over there? And we could have the, well, I forget it. You get the point. You really do need to specify the number of groups and the minimum membership for this. Does it really? Oh right. Well, we'll try and get about 4 or 5 then, so that we can have the Democrat group and the Yeah, I always used to, according to the boss. So, right, but you get the point. It can't be just a carte blanche. You've got to have something specific. I mean, oh no, what's that? I'll just leave that point.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Nightingale. No more members. Oh, Councillor Thompson.
Just for clarity, Mayor, if Councillor Nightingale would like to refer to page 118, para 461, line 8.
Again, please.
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify from the independent's point of view, the independent group leaders allowance goes to the independent group for support. So I actually welcome this. It doesn't come into my pocket. It helps the independent group with whatever they need to do to go forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lanigan. No more members indicating they wish to speak. Councillor Massey, would you like to sum up, please?
Yeah, Philip did part of my job for me, which is to showcase the fact that a group needs to have 5 or more members, so the Ormsby group would not count in this instance for a group leader's allowance. I think the other thing to say about this is that the special responsibility allowances, so the allowances that some councillors get in lieu of, not in lieu, in addition to their basic allowance, the number of councillors receiving a special responsibility allowance can never exceed 30. If you add up chairs, vice chairs, mayor, you get quite close anyway. So that I don't think there would be a situation where you would have a number of 11 group leaders as you could potentially in the structure because of the other allowances. So members who have 2 positions that are remunerated can only take allowance for 1 of those positions, not 2, for instance. But I think that sums everything up. I move the report again.
Councillor Massey. Again, the vote is by simple majority of a show of hands. Can I take it no member wishes for a ballot? Okay. Can we have a show of hands, please, for all those in favour? Thank you. Oh, can you keep your hands up, please, while it's counting? Sorry. All those against, please. Thank you. That is carried. That is the last item of business. Can I thank everyone for their attendance? And I close the meeting.